I'm Greg Jarrett.
I'm Sandra Smith.
I'm Charles Payne, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, June 16th, 2021. I'm Dave Anthony. President Biden has his big meeting with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Republicans are a bit wary.
So I'm not really hopeful. A lot of, constructive things are going to come out of this. I think Putin is going to just play the president.
We speak with GOP Congressman Michael McCaul.
I'm Lisa Brady. There's a heated debate across America about race-based teachings in some public schools and whether the equity-driven effort is forcing kids to think too much about race.
You talk to little kids, they see this guy's my friend. They don't see whether it's my white friend or my black friend or my Latino friend. They just see as my friend.
And I'm Jim Daly. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
It's the grand finale to President Biden's first foreign trip, his meeting in Geneva, Switzerland today with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
He's bright, he's tough, and I have found that he is as they say, when he used to play ball, a worthy adversary.
The president on Monday after his summits with G7 and then NATO leaders.
If he chooses not to cooperate and acts in a way that he has in the past relative to cybersecurity and some other activities, then we will respond.
But Republicans aren't so sure.
I think it's going to be a very important but perhaps dangerous meeting. And I do think the president made major concessions before even going into this meeting, just to have a meeting.
Congressman Michael McCaul is the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
You want to negotiate out of strength and not weakness. When the president waived the sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline in the U.S. national interest, which I don't understand how a Putin pipeline into Europe is in our national interest. It also makes Europe dependent on Russian energy. At the same time, he shuts down the Keystone pipeline, which I think was a setback, and then the Russians attacked with a cyber attack Colonial pipeline and putting the people in energy crisis for about a week on the East Coast. I hope that the president does several things, and I've talked to his team about raising these issues, and it's these cyber attacks. To say, you need to stop this. There need to be consequences to your actions, and you know what? And if you don't, we're going to hit you back. I think
what kind of things do you want the president to do, Congressman, when you say hit back?
Well, there's several. I mean, whether we sanction, but I would like to also look. We have tremendous cyber capabilities, and particularly in nation-state attack, should not go, without consequence in the United States. So the United States government has, we have multiple cybersecurity offensive strategies and capabilities. Once we do the attribution to the source, whether it be their GRU or whether it be these Russian mafia outfits, we could always respond in kind with a cyber attack and hit them back. Otherwise, that's all that Putin understands. He's a KGB officer. And until they see their consequences, bad behavior is going to continue.
Leading up to this summit all week long, the president's been asked about it. He came out and he said that Vladimir Putin is a worthy adversary, that he's bright. A few months ago, he called him a killer. Do you think that was the right move to try to soft talk his way into the meeting or not?
Well, he is a killer. Navalny is a good example. His opposition leader, he tried to poison with a chemical attack. Congressional mandatory sanctions like Nord Stream were not applied in Navalny either. And Putin has basically shut down Navalny's party from being elected in the upcoming elections in the Duma. He is a killer, but I don't see. I think he's made enough concessions to butter him up. I do think the president has to be forceful and he has to be tough in his approach because Putin has gotten very aggressive, and including we have 2 U.S. Marines that are being held hostage in Russia. Paul Whelan and Trevor Reed, who's from Texas, being really held hostage. I've been assured that will come up in this meeting as well. But I have to be honest, I'm not really hopeful. A lot of constructive things are going to come out of this. I think Putin is going to just play the president.
Okay, by playing him, how does Vladimir Putin come out of this with a win, in your view? How could he?
President Biden has backed off of support for Ukraine, which we have also, applied sanctions to. He's moving, our destroyers, out of the region to avoid escalating tensions. He's doing everything he can to appease President Putin. And I always think appeasement's the wrong way to leverage these negotiations to get what you want. He's pretty much given Putin everything he wants. And now Putin can say he scored a victory by, number one, these concessions, but number two, getting the meeting at all.
They're not going to stand side by side, so they're going to have their own statements afterward. I know that Secretary of State Antony Blinken is with the president in this, and the Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister for Russia, is also in on this meeting. Do you think that's smart for the president to have Blinken by his side as opposed to just one-on-one?
I think in the case of this president, yeah. I think he needs advisors around him, and it's probably good to have someone who can also be privy to the conversation to report, what the facts are. The Russians are notorious for propaganda, and they will use this meeting towards their propaganda.
How has the president done so far this whole week, in your view, with his meetings at the G7 or NATO or even with European leaders? Have you thought that he's done some things well?
I do think, it's always good to meet with our NATO allies, our G7 partners. The idea of, the vaccines. We have to counter China and Russia and their vaccine diplomacy. So I think that was certainly a positive move. On the origins of COVID-19, though, to put this back in the hands of the World Health Organization, I don't believe that's the right place to put this. They have utterly failed in their mission. They were complicit with the Communist China. The Director General Tedros was handpicked by President Xi to be in that role. And they did everything they could not to warn the world about what was becoming a global pandemic. And then when tasked to investigate this, they wholly failed in their mission. So I think we need a team of scientists independently that can go in to investigate. But the problem, as I see it, is I'm sure they have destroyed a lot of this evidence, and we may never know the real answer.
A thank you to Congressman Michael McCaul, again the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Now back to today's Biden-Putin summit. Daniel Hoffman is following it closely, a Fox News contributor. He knows Russia very well as a former CIA chief of station.
I think President Biden is going to review the areas where we are in confrontation with Russia, and there's certainly no shortage of those, and then search for areas of potential common ground, like arms control and, for the Biden administration, climate change. Other areas of potential discussion, North Korea, Syria, Iran. There's a dizzying array of issues where our national security interests of both nations collide.
Leading up to this, both President Biden and Vladimir Putin agreed that relations between the U.S. and Russia are at a low point. You agree?
They are at a low point, and that's because Russia wants to trample on human rights inside their own country and use banned chemical weapons to try to assassinate their own citizens, whether in Russia or overseas in the UK, as we saw with Sergei Skripal. It was Russia that invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea, invaded Georgia, interfered with our election, shot down a Malaysian airliner, and then allows these cyber hacking groups to homestead on their territory and target our critical infrastructure, not to mention the SolarWinds attack, which came from Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service.
When it gets down to these cyber attacks and the criminals based in Russia and the ransomware like a Colonial Pipeline and the meat supplier and others that have hit the U.S., there's been talk of trying to get after these Russian criminals. President Putin claims that it's nothing to do with Russia. They're not involved in this. And as for trying to get the Russian-based criminals here, President Putin said this on state TV, and I want your reaction.
If we agree to extradite criminals, then of course Russia will go for it and will do it. But only if the other side, the United States in this case, agrees to the same and will extradite the criminals in question to Russia.
No chance of that, right? Right, Dan?
Well, first of all, let's just dispel the myth here. There's no criminals in the United States. It's just Vladimir Putin seeking to exact revenge on his enemies. Inviting Russia to work with us on cybercrime, I said this at the summit in Helsinki on television for Fox News. It's like inviting a criminal to help you solve a crime that you know they committed in the first place.
So you believe that Russia very much encourages this cyber activity, then?
I do, because what it does is it allows Putin to have a few extra pawns on his chessboard. It gives him leverage.
You mentioned other areas that Russia meddles in. For instance, Syria, what it does with North Korea, any kind of alliances it has with China. How do we deal with those issues?
And that's the challenge for the Biden administration. It's almost like a kaleidoscope. You know, Russia's a co-conspirator along with Iran in Syria's use of chemical weapons and other attacks, human rights attacks on innocent civilian population in Syria. Russia has been providing material assistance to the Taliban, even though the Taliban is shipping opium to Russia and killing a lot of Russian youth as a result. What we have to do is take on each of these issues along with our allies and seek to reduce Russia's leverage to hurt us. And it's challenging because Russia and China are certainly short-term partners. They both see benefit. They're both revisionist powers seeking to overturn the international rules-based order, and they see benefit in countering the United States together, even if they're long-term rivals.
Afterward, they will not be standing side by side in a joint news conference. President Trump did that 3 years ago almost in July in 2018 in Helsinki, Finland, and he caught a lot of flack for seeming to believe Putin's denials of election interference. Is that the reason that President Biden doesn't want to have this side by side?
Everything Vladimir Putin says is meant to influence, not inform. He's not going to tell the truth ever. You know, he's a KGB guy, so he's going to admit nothing, deny everything, and make counter accusations. And I think the Biden administration saw no need. Now, if it were me, I think it would have been beneficial for them to stand toe-to-toe and for President Biden to counter everything Putin says and call him a liar.
You spent time when you were in the CIA in Moscow. What do people there think of the U.S., and how would they view such a meeting between Vladimir Putin and President Biden? I mean, is their president beloved over there?
You think we have infrastructure problems in this country? They are massive in Russia. And Russians know that Putin is stealing them, robbing them blind. He's turned Russia into really a kleptocratic autocracy, and the people really don't matter much to him at all. I think Russians actually have a positive view of the United States and a positive view of the freedoms we enjoy in this country. It's just that they're fed a steady stream of Kremlin propaganda through state TV and other means that Putin now controls. But if history is any judge, eventually Vladimir Putin will be called to answer for his crimes.
Daniel Hoffman, Fox News contributor, former CIA chief of station. Always good to talk to you. Thanks for being with us.
You too. All the best.
This is Jim Daly with your Fox News commentary coming up.
A different kind of summit is planned next week in Washington, focused on equity in education.
We need to make sure that education is a great equalizer, and that starts now. That starts now with our planning for the fall.
With a more normal start to the school year expected, Education Secretary Miguel Cardona suggests schools shouldn't be returning to business as usual as they reopen. But some parents and teachers are concerned about changes already made in some districts, focusing on the theory that American institutions are inherently racist and perpetuate inequalities.
Critical race theory, or equity, treats everyone, regardless of their color or race, as mere avatars. Just avatars on their outward identity with no regard at all for their individual characteristics.
Monica Gill is a history teacher in Loudoun County, Virginia, where dozens of parents have been showing up to school board meetings, and some have started a petition hoping to oust board members with a recall election. In the same district, gym teacher Tanner Cross was suspended for speaking out against a transgender-related policy. That suspension leading to a court fight. Joe Mobley is a father of 3.
What's done in darkness comes to light. Parents are waking up up. Teachers are waking up. And we actually have a large cohort of students who are speaking out against CRT, speaking out against retaliation against teachers that exercise their First Amendment rights.
And this hasn't gone unnoticed on Capitol Hill. Colorado Republican Congressman Ken Buck telling Fox News critical race theory shouldn't be part of curriculum.
It has been used in part or in whole in various school districts in the United States. And it has to stop, and it certainly has to stop with federal taxpayer dollars.
Republicans also taking issue with billions of dollars in COVID relief funds being used as part of the push for more equitable education. But how widespread is this debate? And is it part of a larger trend for parents?
Some people have told me that they think that basically people were so busy with their lives that they didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the Board of Education, to the school board and that sort of thing.
Mike Emanuel is the chief Washington correspondent for Fox News.
So I think some people have come around to say, wait a minute, what's going on in our schools? And really started paying attention. And so last week in Loudoun County, Virginia, they had a school board meeting, and at least 120 people showed up to speak, most about critical race theory, some about the suspension of teacher Tanner Cross. And so it seems like a lot of parents have awakened to find out that things have been changing in their kids' schools, and they're concerned about it. I will tell you that Miguel Cardona, the Secretary of Education, has been pretty clear that as schools are planning to fully come back from COVID, that he sees this as an opportunity to change things. And so, he had a line about, people see the 3 R's as reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, Miguel Cardona says he sees it as reopening, reinvesting in our schools, and reimagining the potential. And so some suggest that is basically he's changing some of the fundamentals. And we know that next week, the Education Secretary is going to hold an equity summit with educators. And a lot of folks are suggesting that that's going to be kind of helping them change curriculum over the summer break. And so a lot of folks in places like Loudoun County, Virginia, and elsewhere are watching very closely, concerned that their kids may be getting more than just the basics of education, that they may be fed some kind of a political agenda.
I know some parents are also concerned that maybe their kids won't get the basics of an education anymore, that they're going to get these other things instead. And some opponents are saying it's just another example of radical policies under this new administration. I mean, do we know if they're really planning sweeping changes in what's actually being taught to kids nationwide, or are they going to wait and see what comes out of this summit next week?
Well, Miguel Cardona said, we need to make sure that education's a great equalizer. And that starts now. That starts with our planning for the fall. And so that sounds like, this equity summit's going to have a lot of guidance for school systems across the country about how they can, include equity in their educational programs going forward. But as you mentioned, there are a lot of parents who are quite alarmed because they say if you look at the studies, the United States is not leading the way in terms of education, that there are a lot of countries that are pulling ahead of us in terms of educating our young people. And so if the United States were a dominant number one in education right now, then you might be able to say, all right, well, then maybe we should, tweak this and tweak that to, work in some other ideas. But there are a lot of folks who say we should really just be doubling down on the basics because many, many American kids are graduating high school without great reading skills and without great mathematics skills. And how do you compete in a global environment if you don't have a top-notch education?
Another question is, when does guidance from the federal government, for instance, or the state governments, for that matter, cross the line into some sort of pressure? Or when does it start feeling like pressure at the local level? Because, for instance, with the critical race theory curriculum, do we know exactly why it's being taught anywhere? Where did it come from? Is it government driven? Was it social media driven? Is it union driven?
Yeah, that's a smart question. My understanding is that some academics have written about it at some of the big universities, and that is in favor with some of the people who are now currently in office, currently in the Biden administration. And so they've taken some of the stuff that maybe was talked about in places like Harvard and elsewhere and are now trying to apply it into daily education, into American education. And so, that's concerning a lot of these parents that I've been speaking with, because they think, that some of this stuff is really kind of reorganizing our education system, and they're worried about it. And I think that, there are a lot of little kids. If you talk to little kids, they see this guy's my friend. They don't see whether it's my white friend or my black friend or my Latino friend. They just see as my friend, and they feel like a lot of the parents I've talked to, that a lot of this stuff is just making kids feel divided, whether you're in one camp or the other. Are you an oppressor or are you a victim? And so it's upsetting a lot of moms and dads who say, my child doesn't see color, doesn't see, these differences that have haunted the United States historically, but that parents are hoping that this new generation, will be able to move forward as Americans and not be divided on the, racial lines or color lines. And so that's a lot of the heartbreak that I've heard from a lot of parents.
Then you hear some other, school-related issues like the debate over using gender-neutral pronouns in an effort to be more inclusive. One school board in New Jersey facing a protest position for taking the names of holidays off the school calendar in an effort to be more inclusive.
Right.
Have we heard the White House or Democratic leaders on Capitol Hill being concerned about any of this backfiring if Republicans are correct in thinking that mainstream America thinks this is all going too far?
So far, no. I've not heard Democratic leaders on the Hill or at the White House really come out and say that they have any concerns about this at this point. I've heard some in the progressive community suggest that this is kind of a fabrication on the right to try to get Republican voters up in arms and get them voting a certain way in the next election, which isn't for another year and a half or so. So, they're basically saying there's nothing to see here. But, a lot of moms and dads I've talked to say that they are seeing stuff come home in their kids' books and their kids' assignments that are asking them to read things that are woke and very progressive and not your traditional fourth or fifth grade or seventh or eighth grade materials.
And just to emphasize what you've been saying, I mean, you have been out on the road, you have been talking to parents. These parents seem like a real cross-section of society, and they're popping up in locations all across the country. It's not like it's one or two districts. This is happening in a lot of places, right?
You're absolutely right. And a lot of folks I've talked to say, look, I'm not a Republican. I'm just really concerned about my kids. And so, to say this is some, vast conservative conspiracy or something like that, a lot of folks just say, look, that may not be the way that I vote, but I am really alarmed with, what's going on in schools. I want the kids to get the basic fundamentals, to learn the skills they're going to need to succeed. And, a lot of the parents I've talked to say this is not about politics, it's about their children. And so it's even nearer and dearer to their hearts. And they're just worried about, what's going on in school and how some of this, what they believe is indoctrination going on in public schools in different parts of the country right now, could impact the next generation and what it's doing to children at a time when we're in a global economy, a very competitive environment where students in other parts of the world are really buckling down on math and science and critical skills needed to compete in the 21st century. And a lot of parents feel like their kids are being fed a bunch of mumbo jumbo.
One other question for you, based on your conversations with parents, have any of them been blaming the teachers' unions? And I ask this because we heard a lot during the push to get schools reopened about the Biden administration, support from teachers' union, links to teachers' union fundraising, things like that. And if they are getting blamed for any of this, could they be digging a hole for themselves? Because could this further drive the debate in some families about, well, maybe we should try to do private school instead of public school, or maybe, encourage more parents to support school choice?
I've noticed a lot of parents that I've spoken with saying that those that have the means are certainly looking at parochial schools and or full-blown private schools because they're uncomfortable with what's going on in the classroom, whether it's the teachers union behind it. Certainly a lot of parents I've talked to were very angry with the teachers unions because they felt like the teachers unions kept moving the goalposts in terms of getting back in the classroom following the COVID pandemic. That, first it was, all the parents need to be vaccinated. Then it was all the kids need to be vaccinated before teachers wanted to go back into the classroom. And so now there's already hard feelings with a lot of the teachers unions about some of those issues. That was very difficult for two-parent families with both parents working outside the home and your children are home staring at a laptop for 6 or 7 hours a day. And now if the curriculum's changing, perhaps as part of that, I think it's only going to make tensions even worse with some of the teachers unions going forward, because there are a lot of folks who feel like kids already lost maybe a year and a half of their education, because a lot of parents I've talked to say they don't think their kids really learned a whole lot while they were staring at their laptops during COVID. And so, making up for that lost time, and then if the agenda or the curriculum is changing, I think that's also alarming to a lot of folks throughout the country.
Sounds like a busy summer behind the scenes and a lot of debate still to come on these many, many school issues. Mike Emanuel, Fox News Chief Washington Correspondent, thanks very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Lisa.
New from the Fox News Podcasts Network.
My name is Kennedy, and welcome to my podcast, which will, I humbly say, single-handedly save the world. You're welcome.
It's Kennedy Saves the World. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Jim Daly.
What's on your mind?
There's no such thing as a perfect family, but some families struggle more than others. Last month, a disgruntled ex-husband and father delivered his last child support payment to his ex-wife. What's so surprising about that? Well, he did it by dumping 80,000 pennies on her front lawn. He backed up a small trailer and dropped $800 in zinc and copper right on the grass. The vindictive act was caught on a security camera, and the story has generated thousands of comments online. Some feel the guy's pain. These are people who have probably been paying alimony and child support for years. Others empathize with the mom and daughter who were embarrassed by the spectacle. Nothing like having your family's drama and dysfunction on display in the neighborhood. As for me, I think the whole situation is just very sad. I feel for everyone. Divorce and its aftermath are always painful, especially when both sides feel slighted and disrespected. It's the rupture of a family and a tragedy that casts long shadows, often lasting for a lifetime. The novelist Leo Tolstoy once famously observed, "All happy families are alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." Generally speaking, most behavior is learned. Bad habits seem to stick more easily than good ones. And as a result, family dysfunction is often cyclical. We repeat the mistakes of our parents, both in our marriages and in raising our kids. Fortunately, I learned to be a husband and a father by doing the exact opposite of what I saw in my dad. My father loved me, and he wanted to do right by us, but his life was a mess, and so was he. Riddled with addictions and broken promises, he abandoned us and wound up dying of exposure alone and destitute. Father's Day is coming up. I still think of my dad and have forgiven him long ago, but successful husbands and fathers don't try to get back at an ex-wife or estranged child with pettiness, paying their support in loose change. Instead, they own up to their mistakes and make good on their promise promise to do better in the future. Responsible men serve others. They don't pout or pile on. They realize life isn't always fair, but they make tough choices that are in their loved ones' best interests, not their own. Good dads build their kids up. They don't tear them down with embarrassing, reckless, and spiteful behavior. The father who dumped the pennies has since apologized. He said his emotions got the best of him. The mother and daughter announced they were planning to donate the $800 worth of coins to a domestic abuse center. It seems good things can come from acts of stupidity. Almost 90 years ago, the old crooner Bing Crosby sang a song titled "Pennies from Heaven." There was also a movie by the same title. As the song goes, every time it rains pennies from heaven. In other words, clouds can have a silver lining. It's not always a bad thing as it may seem. No matter what you're going through, the storm won't last forever. So hang in there, keep your promises, and pay your debts. Just don't pay them in pennies.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. From the Fox News Podcasts Network, subscribe and listen to the Trey Gowdy Podcast. Former federal prosecutor and four-term U.S. Congressman from South Carolina brings you a one-of-a-kind podcast. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.